This is President Joe Biden. On June 17, 2021, Biden signed into law the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, making June 19th, i.e. Juneteenth, a new federal holiday. Now you might be asking, what is Juneteenth? Well, to answer that, let's go back into history a little bit. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that slaves in the Confederate States were free. And on June 19, 1865, the Union Army, led by General Gordon Granger, announced federal orders in Galveston, Texas, proclaiming that all slaves there were free.
For more than 2 years, the enslaved people of Texas were kept in servitude. For more than 2 years, they were intentionally kept from their freedom.
Because the Civil War, the war that would ultimately end slavery, hadn't officially ended yet. And it only ended 2 months prior. And Twitter didn't exist yet, so news took time to reach everyone. Anyway, starting 1 year after the announcement, formerly enslaved people in Galveston celebrated by organizing Jubilee Day. Eventually, Jubilee Day, or Juneteenth, was made an official Texas state holiday in 1980 and officially named Emancipation Day in Texas. Now, even though this was a specific event that happened in Texas, other states around the country also acknowledged Juneteenth as a holiday. But it wasn't until 2020 where it gained widespread recognition. In early June, President Trump announced that he was going to hold a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on June 19th. For some reason, many were outraged that Trump would schedule a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on the day of a Texas state holiday. But whatever. Now that Joe Biden's in office, we finally have someone who truly understands Juneteenth's significance.
And today, we consecrate Juneteenth for what it ought to be, what it must be, a national holiday.
As you know, Joe Biden has been a huge advocate of Juneteenth and has been fighting for it to be a national holiday for decades. I'm kidding, of course. Last year, he didn't even know what it was. Here's Biden complaining about Trump holding a rally on Juneteenth.
He's going down to Texas on Juneteenth, right? The first major massacre, literally speaking, of the Black Wall Street, right?
Wrong. First of all, the rally was in Oklahoma, not Texas.
He's going down to Texas on Juneteenth, right?
Second, he's conflating the Tulsa race massacre with Juneteenth, two very different events happening in two very different time periods.
The first major massacre, literally speaking, of the Black Wall Street, right?
Wrong. Clearly, Juneteenth wasn't what Biden thought it was. And of course, no one in the media fact-checked him on this. I know you're shocked. And during his 36 years as a US Senator and his 8 years as Vice President, Joe Biden never even uttered the word Juneteenth, let alone advocated for it to be a holiday. Nor did he advocate for it to be a federal holiday during his campaign. President Trump, on the other hand, did, but let's not talk about that. Anyway, the bill to make Juneteenth a federal holiday was introduced in February 2021. And 4 months later, it was passed by unanimous consent in the Senate and passed the House by a vote of 415 to 14.
The bill is passed.
And the passage of the bill was pretty much bipartisan as it gets in Congress. But the takeaway in the press was, Juneteenth is officially a federal holiday despite opposition from 14 House GOP members. Here are the 14 House Republicans who voted against a bill making Juneteenth a federal holiday. However, those 14 congressmen weren't doing it for racist reasons. For example, Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky said this from the House floor.
I fully support creating a day to celebrate the abolition of slavery, a dark portion of our nation's history. However, naming this day National Independence Day will create confusion. Why can't we name this Emancipation Day and come together as Americans and celebrate that day together as Americans, black and white, all colors, all races, all ethnicities?
And remember that the Texas holiday was officially named Emancipation Day. I mean, why fix something that isn't broken, right? Whatever. Another congressman who voted against it was Matt Rosendale, who probably had the harshest response to the bill. Here's how CNN covered it.
Matt Rosendale of Montana says, let's call an ace an ace. This is an effort by the left to create a day out of whole cloth to celebrate identity politics as part of its larger efforts to make critical race theory the reigning ideology of our country.
But Rosendale also shared his belief that this isn't an effort to commemorate emancipation, and stated, "Since I believe in treating everyone equally, regardless of race, and that we should be focused on what unites us rather than our differences, I will vote no." Gee, I wonder why CNN left that part out.
I'm going to say this, and I'm going to get in trouble for it, but Matt Rosendale, you might want to look in the mirror. You were not enslaved, so maybe you don't have the standing on this issue.
Yes, Matt Rosendale was not enslaved, but neither was CNN's John King. In fact, no one currently alive was enslaved, as slavery in the United States ended over 150 years ago. No wonder why Dana Bash divorced him. Then there's Congressman Andy Biggs, who, like Congressman Massey, objected to the name of the bill, which is called the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, because we already have an Independence Day. For clarity, July 4th is called Independence Day because it is named after the Declaration of Independence. So the argument is that Juneteenth Independence Day should have been called Juneteenth Emancipation Day, named after the Emancipation Proclamation. And that would have made logical sense, but we're dealing with Congress, so never mind. Now, the objections to the bill could be described as reasonable, but if you ask people like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's an affront to decency and morality.
This is pretty consistent with, I think, the Republican base, and whether it's trying to fight against teaching basic history around racism and the role of racism in U.S. history.
So 245 Republicans in Congress voted in favor of the bill, but pointing out the 14 that voted against it proves the overall intentions of the Republican base. As usual, her math is way off. I would like to point out that in 1997, Congress officially recognized Juneteenth through Senate and House joint resolutions. The annual observance of June 19 as Juneteenth Independence Day is an important and enriching part of our country's history and heritage. The celebration of Juneteenth provides an opportunity for all Americans to learn about our common past and to better understand the experiences that have shaped our nation. Second, when these resolutions were passed, the House and the Senate were both held by, wait for it, a Republican majority, and the resolution sponsors were both Republicans. In the Senate, it passed with unanimous consent, and in the House, it passed by a vote of 419-0. But I thought the Republicans hated Juneteenth or whatever.
You know, there's a direct through line from that to denying Juneteenth, the day that is widely recognized and celebrated as the symbolic kind of day that to represent the end of slavery in the United States.
Okay, this is classic AOC. Literally, no one is denying that the events of Juneteenth happened, including the 14 Congresspeople who voted against the bill.
But I think it just goes to show the importance of teaching our history, warts and all, because it helps us appreciate the justice and freedoms that we have today.
AOC is acting like the evils of slavery are being hidden from American history classes. I mean, if anything was hidden from AOC in school, it was basic economics.
I'm very thankful to all of our colleagues, including the white men in the Republican caucus that said, okay, fine, we'll vote for this or on this one too.
So AOC is suggesting that the white male Republicans in Congress somehow voted against their principles. And she knows that's not true. She's just a very dishonest person. And finally, ABC had a Juneteenth special, sponsored by Target for some reason, that featured an interview with a former president who never mentioned Juneteenth in any of his speeches during his 8 years in office. First, he talked about the presidency.
When you look at that list of presidents, we still haven't seen a woman. And the notion that women somehow are not qualified, something's happening in our society that prevents them from ascending to the highest office in the land.
I seem to recall several women who ran for the Democratic nomination, but instead, the Democrats picked a white male septuagenarian to be their candidate. But sure, it's society's fault.
The same is true for African Americans.
You know we had an African American president, right?
It's the same is true for Latinos and the first Americans, Native Americans. The odds are stacked in ways that prevent a lot of young people from realizing their potential. And we can do something about it.
Then do it. Nominate one. Are you going to keep pointing it out, or are you actually going to do something about it? But of course they won't, because if you fix a problem, you can't complain about it.
We're in a community, Anacostia, in Washington, D.C.
That doesn't sound right.
Anacostia.
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 Or maybe I'm just being picky. Okay, moving on.
We're in a community, Anacostia, in Washington, D.C. that's representative of a lot of communities around the country where the kids who grow up here may formally be free, but structurally, because of poverty, because of schools that aren't working, because of substandard housing, it requires so much more effort for them to live out that American dream.
So substandard housing, poverty, and schools that aren't working in a community run by Democrats. I know you're shocked.
Our job is to make sure that it's not a myth. And right now, for too many, it still is.
Well, clearly, the Democrats who have been in power in DC for decades aren't doing their job. Maybe if they focused less on the past, they could address problems in the here and now. But again, we're dealing with Democrats, and that would make too much sense. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, sharing, and slamming that like button. Be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel, and hope to see you next time. If there is next time.